The parents in San Francisco decided that they would go after the 3 woke members. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle. San Francisco voters overwhelmingly supported the ouster of 3 school board members Tuesday in the city's first recall election in nearly 40 years. The landslide decision means board president Gabriela Lopez and members Allison Collins and Fauga Maligo will officially be removed from office and replaced by mayoral appointments 10 days after the election is officially certified. Parents were tired of the woke school board system that did not value their children, did not value the families, did not value education. They used San Francisco schools as not just a source of indoctrination, but as a place to close down. San Francisco schools did not want to stay open. They wanted to keep masks. They became a burden to the families. And in becoming burdens to the families, the school board decided that they knew best. And by knowing best, along the way, the parents decided they knew better. This is something that's been going on now for the last couple of years as we've seen Democrats, and you can tell their polling is terrible. We're about to shift to the polling. The Democrats have said along the way that we need parents to not be involved in schools. How dare parents think they should have a say in the education of their children? How dare the parents think they can decide the curriculum and they can decide the attendance policy and they can decide the mask policy? Well, the parents are also something else. Taxpayer. It's not just the parents who want to say in the kids' school. They're taxpayers. And as taxpayers, they want to say in their kids' schooling. And they get it. They get it in large part because of the recall. But it goes beyond that. It's more important than that. It's part of a larger effort around the nation. The GOP culture war attacks are alarmingly potent, warns the DCCC. That's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That is the arm of the House Democrats that runs their campaigns. This is from Politico. It dropped today, or actually it dropped last night. Democrats' own research shows that some battleground voters think the party is preachy, judgmental, and focused on culture wars. And the party's House campaign arm has a stark warning for Democrats. Unless they more forcefully confront the GOP's alarmingly potent, in their words, alarmingly potent, culture war attacks, from critical race theory to defunding the police, they risk losing significant ground to Republicans in the midterms. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is recommending a new strategy to endangered members and their teams, hoping to blunt the kinds of GOP attacks that nearly erased their majority last election and remain a huge risk ahead of November. In presentations over the past 2 weeks, party officials and operatives used polling and focus group findings to argue Democrats can't simply ignore the attacks, particularly when they're playing at a disadvantage. A generic ballot of swing districts from late January showed Democrats trailing Republicans by 4 points. It wasn't all bleak, though. The data showed that Democrats could mostly regain the ground lost to Republicans if they offered a strong rebuttal to the political hits. When faced with a defund the police attack, for instance, the presenters encouraged Democrats to reiterate their support for police. And on immigration, they said Democrats should deny support for open borders or amnesty and talk about their efforts to keep the border safe. Now listen to this. This is the key paragraph here. If Democrats don't answer Republican hits, the party operatives warned, the GOP's lead on the generic ballot balloons to 14 points from 4 points. A dismal prediction for Democrats, when the GOP only needs to win 5 seats to seize back the majority. But when voters heard a Democratic response to that hit, Republicans' edge narrowed back down to 6 points, giving candidates more of a fighting chance, especially since those numbers don't factor in Democrats going on the offense. Okay. It also, the internal polling showed Republicans are actually pretty effective with center-left voters and with independents and with Hispanic voters. But there's a problem with the Democrats' own polling. First of all, we've never seen ever in the history of modern polling We've never seen an R plus 14 generic ballot. It simply doesn't exist. It is the Yeti of polling. It doesn't exist. The abominable snowman, the unicorn, it is a polling R plus 14 is basically if the Loch Ness Monster and a unicorn had a love child raised by the abominable snowman and Bigfoot. That is R plus 14 polling. It doesn't exist. It is more mythological than Zeus and the pantheon of Olympic gods. And yet the Democrats' polling is warning of R plus 14 generic ballot polling. It's not the Republicans' polling. It's the internal Democratic lay of the land. That's really bad for the Democrats. Oh my gosh, that is bad for the Democrats. And it's bad because if it's real, the Democrats really are toast. I mean, if they push back on the defense, you get to R plus 6. The R plus 6 generic ballot polling, remember, this is of generic ballot polling. You typically have to add 2 points to the GOP there because of registered voters and the constituencies, how it breaks down. That gives the Republicans really an R plus 8. That's 1994 numbers. That's not 2010 numbers. That's 1994 numbers. That's Republican Revolution numbers. That's Gingrich Revolution territory. That's how big it is. That's how bad it is for the Democrats right now. That's the lay of the land. So it's no surprise the Democrats went out and said, hey, we're all getting rid of the masks. We follow the science, and the science says get rid of masks. We follow the science. The science says open up the schools, and they've got a problem on that end. We're going to spend more time on this later, but they got a problem on that end too. And the problem on that end too is that the partisan progressive Democrats are livid with the Democrats for walking it all back. Got all sorts of problems there. If the Democrats go too far to respond to the Republicans, they alienate the progressives. Think about it on schools. The Democrats tell us all the time they're not engaged in critical theory, and yet when it's evidence of it is found, they say, well, we need it. They're trying to have it multiple ways, every which way, and it's not going to work for them. It's bad. The Democrats are having a real hard time threading this needle. But the larger issue is look at their solutions. Say they want to support the police. Go out aggressively and say they want to support the police. That's not what voters see on the ground. They see Democratic politicians letting people out of jail who should be in jail. They see Cori Bush and AOC and Rashida Tlaib and the like said, oh no, we really do want to defund the police. And we're going to double down on it. Cori Bush out there made the Democrats mad, saying, I'm going to keep saying defund the police because it's the right thing to do. And then the Democrats are going to say, we oppose an open border and amnesty. Who's going to believe them? Who's going to believe them on that? And all you have to do is go take a camera down to the border and show. Notice, by the way, how much of the media has stopped covering the border. With the exception of Bill Malugin at Fox News, it's gone away. You don't see CNN or MSNBC or anyone else at the border. It's as if the story doesn't exist while people are still streaming across the border. It's the media giving an assist to Joe Biden. Think about this. The border issue is showing up in the Democratic polling as a problem for the Democrats, and suddenly the media has stopped covering it. This is a problem for the Democrats. And the Democrats say they're going to go on offense. They say they're going to go on offense. How do you go on offense? How do you go on offense when Joe Biden is so far underwater and the Democrats control everything? They point to a special election last spring in New Mexico where Melanie Stansbury, Democrat from New Mexico, she got into Congress in a special election against a Republican candidate who had accused her of trying to defund the police and disband the Border Patrol. But here's the problem. Her district was already like D plus 20. There's no way the Republicans were going to win. But he says we need to push back. She pushed back. She said she's not for open borders. She's not for defunding the police. She pushed back hard. And in a D+20 district, guess what? Majority of voters agreed and supported her. But voters in a D+1 district, they may not. And there's a side story here. You know, the Democrats were very aggressive in their redistricting. They were very aggressive in redistricting. And they carved up a lot of districts, and those districts are D+1, D+2, maybe D+5. Means the Democrats have a 5-point advantage. But that's based on 2020 when Donald Trump was on the ballot. He's not on the ballot this time. And the Democrats' own polling, I read you that line, their own polling registers and plays well with center-left voters. Who are center-left voters? Suburban moms. They're furious with the Democrats. You don't come between them and their children, and you don't come between them and their 401k. And right now, the Democrats are interfering on both fronts. The stock market isn't doing well. Inflation is on the rise. And their daughters who want collegiate scholarships now have to compete with boys pretending to be girls. And the Democrats are okay with that. May God have mercy on them, because the voters will show them no mercy in November if this keeps up.